The testing and release of enterprise solutions can be a daunting task, to say the very least. IT leaders know all too well that a failed effort can not only be costly, but can also potentially disrupt the business and damage the corporate reputation. That is why it is so critically important that thorough testing must be considered a top priority in organizations today. In this report, we'll offer advice and best practices that will help IT professionals to improve the effectiveness and efficiency of their testing processes. This program features interview guest Rex Black, president of RBCS. For almost 20 years, RBCS has delivered consulting, outsourcing, and training services in the areas of software, hardware, and systems testing and quality. There are several teaching points in the program. First, we'll talk about the challenges organizations face in regard to testing today. Next, a look at what's needed to improve and streamline the testing process. Then, we'll discuss the testing team and how to get them aligned, motivated, and on point. We'll then conclude by offering best practices to ensure effective and efficient testing of enterprise solutions. In this first segment, we'll talk about the challenges organizations face today in regard to testing enterprise solutions. If there is a single example that would speak to the critical importance of adequate testing, one need look no further than the Avon Company and their recent effort to launch a new order management system and website. As the story goes, Avon was forced to scrap plans to move ahead with a company-wide rollout of a new SAP ERP and CRM application, with a front-end system built on IBM WebSphere e-commerce software. When the system was initially launched in Canada, end users were confronted with a system that was not working well, was said to be overly complex, and deemed not user-friendly. Avon had to write off the project, which is said to have cost between $100 and $125 million. In addition, Avon is said to have lost 16,000 of their local representatives in the process. So, what went wrong, you ask? Well, experts suggest that the entire project was simply rushed into production and rolled out before it was proven. Certainly a tough lesson for the senior management at Avon, and underscores the critical importance of the testing process. Now, let's turn to our expert, Rex Black, and learn about some of the key challenges associated with the testing and rollout of enterprise solutions. Rex, welcome back to the program.
It's good to be here. Looking forward to our conversation, Mike.
Now, Rex, as you are very well aware, testing enterprise solutions can be a formidable challenge. The cost factors, time constraints, and undetected errors can all work against the testing team and delay a critical deployment. Tell us more about some of the challenges organizations face today in regard to testing.
It really is a multidimensional problem. Part of the problem is that a typical enterprise could have anywhere from 50 to 250 distinct applications running in their data center. Now, these applications don't all necessarily have to talk to each other, but the trend is more and more towards being able to share data across different applications, being able to integrate things that once didn't have to be integrated. So, for example, in the retail space, it's not unusual now for a person to be in the aisles able to actually provide information to a customer using a smartphone that ties through a website directly into inventory and is able to check to see whether the item, which might not be in stock in one store, is actually in stock in other stores. That sounds like a pretty straightforward thing, but that can potentially tie together dozens of systems and create data flows that were not designed in when those applications were initially built. So interoperability is one of the real key challenges, and trying to ensure interoperability, which becomes particularly difficult when you think that all these applications are on their own life cycle. So there's this issue. It's not only a technical issue of interoperability, there's also coordination of life cycle that has to be carefully considered here. We don't want a situation where interoperating applications are dropping into the data center in an uncoordinated fashion and having unforeseen impacts on other applications with which they share data. The data sharing is not always immediately visible too, because you get shared data repositories. So the applications might not be communicating directly to each other, but they might be putting data into and taking data out of a common repository, each processing it. And so if there's not good communication across the teams about what that data is and changes that are being made to that data, that can be a real source of problems. So those are sort of technical issues and just process issues. You also get human issues that come in here as well, in the sense that these teams may or may not be geographically co-located. If they're not co-located, then that increases the amount of challenges associated with communication. Plus, there's a lot of use of outsourcing. So then we're going to have the team, even on one given application, might not be geographically co-located. So there has to be strong management to ensure that these kinds of communication risks, which are so critical in the sense of interoperating, cohabitating applications in a shared data center, are being appropriately dealt with. There are also financial issues. Trying to replicate a production environment for testing purposes is often prohibitively expensive. Yet there are certain kinds of issues that can only be seen in a production replica environment, especially things like reliability and performance. So it's very easy to miss critical bugs related to reliability and performance, which can be very high impact to the customer and to the business when they occur, but at the same time very expensive to try to detect. So this is really one of the major challenges in software engineering for an enterprise these days, is how to deal with this final bit of the project of making sure that everything works before we put it into the data center.
So then, considering the challenges you've mentioned, what approach should organizations take with their systems testing projects?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that we've seen with clients that seems to work well is to have some sort of, sometimes it's referred to as a portfolio management function. This is not as simple as having a project management office. People sometimes get this confused and say, oh, we have a PMO, so we have project managers and so forth. Well, the project managers are there to run individual projects, right? To the extent that those project managers are aware of and trying to manage risks that arise across projects, that's really more of an accidental kind of thing. It's an act of good organizational hygiene, if you will, on the part of the project manager, and they might or might not have enough brain space and time to think about those things. So portfolio management would really sit a level above that and would be looking at all of the moving parts and how they go about managing those to successful deployment in the data center. Now, at the very least, this group has to be responsible for some sort of system integration testing to make sure that things are actually going to interoperate together. But ideally, the portfolio management function would actually kick in well before that in the life cycle, because if you detect problems in system integration testing, those are going to be very expensive. Not as expensive as a problem found in production, but certainly more expensive than a problem that was found, say, in a unit test or a requirements review. So the portfolio management function really has to engage from the start and have the job of seeing the whole picture, the big picture, as the cliche goes, and being able to see all of the different applications, the life cycles they are on, the features that are going to be added, and the whole roadmap that exists for each application, and really thinking in a anticipatory fashion about what the challenges are going to be 6 months, 12 months, 18 months from now, rather than reacting to the oh no moments that bubble up at the end in system integration testing.
Next, we'll discuss how to improve and streamline the testing process. We'll also talk about how to keep the testing team aligned and motivated. Delivering high-quality applications and services to employees and customers is a mandate for today's IT organizations. Failure to do so can lead to all types of business issues. In fact, a recent survey of hundreds of IT leaders throughout the U.S. and Canada by the firm Coleman identified the leading direct business consequences of poorly run or failed development and testing projects. The survey indicated 96% of IT leaders considered loss of reputation as the most significant consequence. 93% noted the loss of customers to competitors. 74% indicated the loss of functionality. 72% identified late delivery of new customer offerings as a major consequence. and 28% claimed increased calls to customer service as an area of concern. In addition, the survey went on to reveal that 60% of the IT leaders admitted that customer-facing applications go into production late, and 76% admitted to investing in costly short-term fixes to bring projects online. So, no matter how you slice it, poorly planned and executed development and testing projects create real havoc for enterprises operating in today's complex and unforgiving global markets. Let's return to our guest expert for more advice on improving and streamlining the testing process in order to reduce or eliminate the risk factors. Rex, let me ask you, what should be your overall goal in testing? What really needs to be accomplished?
Sure. Well, if you think about testing in general, the main goals are typically finding defects, especially the most important ones, reducing risk to an acceptable level, providing information to management about the findings of testing and what they mean, and ultimately building confidence that the application can be deployed without there being a big disaster. So if we think about systems testing, system integration testing, that last bit right before we go into production, then really we have to look at what kinds of defects do we need to focus on here. Obviously, major defects will include things like interoperability, where two or more systems need to collaborate. We need to make sure that that's been adequately tested, as well as within each individual system, making sure that all the end-to-end functionality is there, and that the non-functional behaviors such as performance, reliability, usability, and so forth are there and they are solid. We want to make sure that we've covered all the important dimensions of coverage, which have to go beyond just functionality, have to look at non-functional elements, as I say. They have to look at data. They have to look at user personas. They have to look at security and so forth. So clearly identify the dimensions of coverage and make sure that those have all been covered. That's an essential part of making sure that you're building confidence. Understand what the key risks are to the quality of the system. Make sure that all those risks have been adequately addressed by testing. And then make sure all of that information that's being created by these testing activities is being captured in such a way and communicated in such a way that management is receiving the information when they need it to make those important decisions. The phrase that I have used with clients recently is that you want to think that less is more, and you want to focus on speed to insight. You want to make sure that you're giving people just the information they need, not overwhelming them with tactical details about test results. And you want to make sure that they are quickly able to digest that information, get insight into what's the right thing to do next from a quality point of view, and then be able to do it.
Rex, when organizations are in the process of creating or updating their testing and rollout process, what are the key factors that need to be considered?
So there's processes that are primarily internal to the test team. They generate work products which are useful to people outside of the test team, but the process is primarily internal. And then there are collaborative processes. So an example of an internal process would be, what do you need to do to write a good bug report? This might seem obvious to people, but in fact what I've found with most testers is that when they originally come into testing, their initial testing work, their bug reports are rather poor. And so there needs to be a clear process for how to write a good bug report. So that's an internal work process for the test team that does create a work product which has value outside of the test team. So you want to identify those kinds of processes. You also, as I said, we need to identify the collaborative or cross-functional types of processes. For example, test releases. How to get software out of the repository, the code repository, and into the test environment where the systems testing and system integration testing are happening. This is a very complicated thing, in spite of the fact that it seems as if it ought to be simple. And the reason it seems to people that it ought to be simple is because we've all become so used to this little pop-up on our PC or our phone saying an update is available. Would you like to download it? And most of the time, cross your fingers, that just works, right? The fact is, though, that is a very complicated thing that's happening there. And when you're talking about this happening in a test environment, there are multiple parties along the way that have to get involved, and there are multiple points of failure at which very significant problems can occur. So that process has to be very carefully understood. All of the participants have to know the role that they're supposed to play. There have to be quality checkpoints along the way so that we can recognize, oops, we better abort this before we get to the point of actually blowing up test environments. Now, I say blowing up, that sounds dramatic. Obviously, there's no dynamite involved. But I have heard plenty of stories from clients about test releases gone awry that caused so much damage that the entire test environment, dozens of machines, had to have what's called a bare metal install, which is basically you start with the operating system and build your way up. And that can consume dozens of person hours of effort.
Okay, Rex, let's say I run a testing team that usually gets the job done with good results. However, we'd like to take it up a notch or two and make improvements. Improvements such as getting the team aligned and becoming more efficient. How can we accomplish that?
Sure. Well, first off, I would say make sure that you have clearly defined objectives for the testing and what you're trying to accomplish. Work with your stakeholders. Well, first identify your stakeholders. Who are you actually providing services to? And what are those services? And what objectives do the stakeholders have for those services? With that in place, we can then identify targets for that by putting in place metrics for effectiveness, efficiency, and satisfaction for each of the objectives and where those should be. So that's sort of the big picture of making sure that our team is aligned with the needs. Once we have our team aligned with the needs of the organization, then we can start to think about how we improve our operations. There's no point in improving our operations if we're not aligned with the needs of the organization, because that's like going really fast down the wrong road. Once we're going down the right road, then we can think about, okay, skills. How do we build the skills of the testers in such a way that makes them more effective and efficient in terms of carrying out these objectives? Environments, tools, those kinds of things. But all the way through that process, as you're thinking about those things, every single improvement that is made should be traceable to one or more of those objectives. If it's not directly or indirectly supporting the improvement of the way in which the test organization achieves its objectives, then it's not worth doing.
And Rex, how can technology, like cloud-based solutions, for example, help with team alignment and efficiency?
So cloud-based solutions have at their root a technology called virtualization, or more precisely, server virtualization. Server virtualization is something that is very important and helpful for testers in that it allows us to create test environments fairly quickly and to archive those environments so that in the future, should we need to restore an environment and rerun tests against that environment, that can be done very easily. This has been a major improvement. It's taken quite a while, but the rudiments of that capability, the ability to what's sometimes called snapshot a server and save that, have been around for some time, and it's been underutilized, but I think with the increased awareness of cloud computing, this is going to become something that testers will be more aware of. Now, another thing that test teams can do with cloud computing, if they are fortunate enough to work in the right production environments, is to be able to spin up or configure a almost perfect, or in some cases perfect, replica of the production environment using resources they don't have to own. They can rent them. This allows testing that in some cases would otherwise be prohibitively expensive. So for example, performance and reliability testing, which are very much reliant on having a production-like, or better yet, production replica environment. For many of our clients, historically, it's just been cost prohibitive to do that, to have a test environment that duplicates the production environment. Now, given that you can rent the production replica environment by the hour in the cloud, it actually is possible to do that kind of testing. So this is a major advantage that comes out of cloud computing and can help improve the effectiveness and efficiency of a test team.
Well, let's go back to talking about the testing team for a moment. How can you keep them communicating, motivated, and on target?
Well, communication within enterprise testing teams is challenging because they do tend to be large. We have clients that are testing enterprise scale systems and in various environments ranging from retail to entertainment systems, basically computer gaming. but their problems are very similar. You know, you have hundreds of testers potentially broken across a dozen, 2 dozen or more groups. Of course, you're going to have a significant risk of siloing in those situations. So it's very important that there be a central function of test management at a director level or perhaps even above, making sure that everything is being coordinated. Agile methodologies can tend to exacerbate this siloing effect because the Agile teams are very focused on the goals of each iteration. And so they tend to be heads down, what are we trying to accomplish here? How do we make sure that's pulling in the direction of successful releases of all of the applications into the enterprise's data center? So communication is a big part of that, setting direction, making sure that everybody understands these are the things that need to happen, this is how we get things done. Having well-defined strategies that everybody's able to follow is very important. Now, part of course, getting people to do the right thing is setting clear direction. You have to let people know this is what we need to be doing. Otherwise, they're just going to take their best guess, and you'll have people going off in every which way, right? But of course, clear direction by itself is not enough. You have to provide motivation and avoid demotivation for correct action. So providing motivation is, you know, the things like making sure that people avoid unnecessary overtime, wasteful overtime, that the test team is seen by the organization as valuable team within the organization, as well as has some self-respect. So there's the usual kinds of team building things. But you also have to make sure that there aren't any counterproductive things happening either at a micro level or a macro level that distort behavior. So for example, I heard, and this is an enterprise testing organization, one group within that organization, one of their managers set a target that said that no more than, I think it was 10% of a tester's defect reports could be rejected as non-issues. Okay? Now, that seems like a noble idea. Yes, of course, we'd want to keep the number of false positives down to a reasonable amount. So it can be inefficient. But there can be many reasons for a tester reporting something as defective when the software itself is actually behaving correctly. For example, the requirements are vague and don't say what's supposed to happen in a given circumstance. Or the tester just finds something a little weird and wants someone to take a look at it. You don't want to send a message through, especially financial incentives, to people saying, don't do your job. And while this manager certainly did not intend to do that, what he had done was to send that message, don't do your job. In other words, ignore things unless you can actually prove that they are wrong. Whereas in fact, the opposite attitude is what we want in a tester, that they should be suspicious of anything until it's proved that it's right.
Next, some parting words of advice from our expert, Rex Black. In this report, we discuss the challenges organizations face in regard to testing today. We identified ways to improve and streamline the process. In addition, methods to keep teams aligned, motivated, and on point were discussed. Now, we'll conclude by offering several testing success factors and closing thoughts from our expert. Rex, as we wrap up the program, could you summarize your advice today and offer us a few key success factors?
Well, as I said, starting out, I think it's partly a testing problem, partly a portfolio management problem. So assuming that we can get the portfolio management piece of the puzzle in, focusing on the testing itself, having good environments available, maybe taking advantage of things like cloud computing to spin up environments when needed and to save money. Good idea, definitely if possible. Making sure that you've got good coordination across the teams, that you've established that collaborative culture that we talked about, engaging positively and successfully with the stakeholders to define what services should be provided and how we measure success for those, maintaining proper attitudes and motivation within the team, avoiding any of the quality cop, process cop pitfalls. Those would be things that I would think that would be critically important to be a successful enterprise-level testing team.
So, Rex, a final thought or comment for our viewers, please?
you're not going to steer the Titanic in 30 seconds. One of the things that I think people in enterprise testing situations fail to understand is how long it takes to affect meaningful change when you're managing a testing organization of 100 or 500 or 1,000 people. People whose background is working in a small organization managing a test team of 3 or 4 people will often be stunned at how long it takes to make significant changes at the enterprise level. So don't get discouraged. Keep at it. Have a long-term vision of where things need to go. Make sure that you're moving towards that.
Rex, thank you for bringing us up to date on this important topic.
Mike, thanks very much. Enjoyed the conversation and look forward to future ones.
That completes our report, Streamlining System Testing for Enterprise Releases. I'm Michael Quinlan, and thanks for watching.